Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading video for Monday, August 28th, 2023, which at least I can say is a week from my last AM reading video. So, keeping that pattern alive for at least the last couple videos. And as always with these videos, I'm going to start with a short story. I am currently finishing this collection, Oi Caramba, an anthology of Jewish stories from Latin America, edited by Alan Stavins. I am reading the penultimate story this week. It is in a collection of stories written by the Argentinian writer Jorge Luis Borges. This one is called Death in the Compass, which is a little bit of a satire, I think, of detective whodunit stories, and I'm kind of there for that. I feel like maybe out of all the genres, the detective story kind of irritates me the most, or more likely the whodunit aspect, which tends to invite a lot of conspiracy theories and plot forward ways of thinking, and it's just not my favorite. But anyway, this story begins with the murder of a rabbi attending a Talmudic conference in an unnamed city. And the phrase, the first letter of the name is written, which refers to the four-letter name of God in Jewish thought, that only four of them can actually be written out. But anyway, what it looks like is that the most simple explanation is that somebody was looking to steal sapphires from this conference and wandered into the wrong room and startled the rabbi and killed him on accident. But the detective Lundrat decides that's just too uninteresting of a explanation, so he decides to take all of the books on Hasidim, which is a Jewish sect, and mysticism, and think up his own theory about what happened. And he decides that this is part of a grand conspiracy where people are going to be killed in four quadrants of the city, and it's going to coalesce with a certain amount of time passing, and a note that says the next letter of the name of God is revealed. And I mean, to be technical about it, that is what ultimately happens. So maybe I should eat my hat, but I have more of the story to explain. It does start with him, taking up the books and saying it has to follow some sort of mystical pattern rather than the obvious answer in front of me. So basically, by the time we get to the fourth letter, he thinks he's figured out the pattern based on sort of a geography, rhombus shape, a bunch of clues that come out of philosophical and mystic texts, and he ends up in the southern quadrant of the city. He thinks a day early to catch the murderers, and then he realized that he's been foiled by this character named Red Charlock, who several years ago, Lundrat arrested Charlock's brother, and the brother died in jail, and meanwhile Charlock was shot in the stomach and left in agony for days. He was somebody attempted to force him to convert to Christianity, and that sort of brought him into a mindset about how the world is a labyrinth and nothing makes sense. But it does end up that the first murder was really what the simplest explanation was. It was a robbery gone wrong. But when Charlock realized his nemesis Lundrat decided that it had to be more interesting and convoluted than all of that, he decided basically to give in to Lundrat's conspiracies and commit murders of people whose significance to the story is, revealed. And ultimately, the fourth is a trap so that he can kill his nemesis, Lundrat. So, yeah, it's a detective story, which is a satire of a detective story. There's a lot of references. The first thing I pick up on is a lot of references to anti-Semitism and pogroms and that sort of thing. And this ties into a lot of very personal feelings I have about how so many conspiracy theories are tied into blaming the Jews for random shit, basically. But there's a lot more to be said for it. I mean, there's a lot of, philosophical and mystical clues that are kind of way beyond me, and I don't necessarily care about that sort of stuff. I mean, the truth is, I just hate the whodunit sort of puzzle piece collecting part of any detective fiction. My mind doesn't, latch onto that stuff. I don't read fiction to solve a puzzle. I'm a character reader. What this, though, reminded me of is I do watch a bunch of television, and oftentimes it does feel like some of the TV shows I watch lend themselves to uncovering a sort of mystery. And I get so annoyed by the people who get too into the weeds of, basically a scavenger hunt for puzzle pieces. And so many times, at least in my favorite stories, which are ultimately not about, uncovering puzzle pieces for the sake of the plot, it actually is supposed to be more character driven, people go in wild and unhinged directions full of sorts of conspiracy theories and nonsense, just, because everything has to be more and more exciting to them, much like with Lombrot in this story. So I really appreciated a story that took them down a peg and brought them back to a sort of reality. So, yeah, I guess ultimately I kind of enjoyed this one. Speaking of genre fiction that I'm getting too annoyed by, I think I'll go to The Forever Summer by Jamie Brenner, which was my page 112 tag pick this month, where I pick a book off of my physical unread shelf solely by reading page 112. Now, of course, I've read the whole book, and in all honesty, I liked it, but again, I feel like I'm coming to women's upmarket fiction and thinking, oh, too plotty. Or at least this one is a little too plotty and a little too melodramatic for my tastes. Although it was easy to read and kind of fun in that way. But anyway, this is also a nice story to end the summer with, obviously. It takes place in Provincetown, in small little bed and breakfast. After two half-sisters find out through this Ancestry.com sort of, inspired service that the identity of their biological father. And actually the first older sister had no idea that the father who raised her wasn't her biological father, and only found out when her half-sister, who was a test tube sperm donation baby, contacted her after using this service that they both, submitted their DNA to. But anyway, we start with Marin, the older sister, who seems to have it all, although she's kind of losing it all. She had an engagement, and she had a high-level career, but she ended up breaking off her engagement when she felt this intense physical attraction to a man at work, but they're not supposed to fraternize that way. And when they're found out, she's, first out of her first engagement and then out of a job. And so things are, in a state of flux for her. Also, her parents are getting divorced. And that's when Rachel, who is this LA young girl in her 20s, kind of drifting and looking for identity, and her mother's a bit of flighty, fluffy person, she contacts Marin saying, well, I found you, and now I found the biological, I found my biological dad, and I found out he's dead, but he has a mother who is this bed and breakfast owner in Provincetown, and they decide to go. And then actually, Marin's mother, Blythe, is visiting at the time and is shocked by these revelations. And spoiler alert, Marin was not, a sperm donation baby. She was, a love child conceived out of an affair. And Blythe is stunned to learn that her former lover from 30 years ago is dead. And she's also at odds because she feels blindsided by this divorce proceeding from her husband. And so she also goes to Provincetown to visit Amelia, who is the grandmother figure, Amelia's wife Kelly, and it's basically where these characters sort of discover bonds to one another and to other people, and are basically able to form a sense of family and new identity and what have you, and solve all of their issues, and then some, because this is the sort of story where it's like when you can add another plot twist on it, that's what Brenner does. And I mean, she's already following multiple characters, but she's adding so many plot twists because we have the issue of Marin and her relationship to this man, and if that's going to work out, and there's, more complications that come with that reveal later, and Rachel is trying to get to know her grandmother, but then she's sidelined by this intense physical attraction to, you know, a son of one of their friend groups. And because, of course, that has to happen. And, of course, there has to be obstacles in the way, starting with him, the guy Lucas thinking she is too young for him. And yeah, then Blythe is dealing with trying to assess the death of this lover and trying to assess if her marriage is over, and there's a new guy, of course, who comes in with the intense physical attraction thing. You know, that sort of thing, I guess, that annoyed me, although technically that's, I think, also how Amelia and her wife Kelly met, you know, 30 years ago. And that story ultimately, you know, moved me the most, because it's about, like, ultimately 30 years later, about a long-standing relationship, and they're owning this bed and breakfast together. But this season they took the season off. Kelly had some a cancer scare from earlier, which comes back, and then Amelia is dealing with she's haunted by the death of her son, which she blames herself for, because her children were sideswiped by, you know, this affair with Kelly and how it upended, you know, their family life. And she's been estranged for decades from her daughter Nadine, who had been living in Italy, and then comes back in this story basically to be the bad guy. And all she wants is to make sure that they sell the property, and that these two sudden, you know, biological relations by the name of Marin and Rachel don't get their hands on it. So yeah, lots and lots going on. You know, there's cozy characters, unless they're, you know, coded to be super bad guys. But, you know, a lot of this stuff is, you know, explained to us rather than explored, because there's just so much going on and it's plot first. And I mean, it can be frustrating to me. I want to kind of have fun and be breezy with things, but at the same time, there's a lot of big issues in this that I feel like she's kind of just, you know, walking on, you know, the surface of. You know, there's the issue of family and what is your family. And, you know, all of these people who don't know each other are coming together and immediately, you know, calling each other family members, which I guess by the end of the story feels a little earned. But by the beginning, and maybe this is just my own nitpick, you know, people calling themselves sisters and all of that when you don't even know each other, it just feels weird to me. I gotta admit, I wish Rachel's backstory was a little more fleshed out or something, and that she wasn't sidelined by a ridiculous romance for no reason, except I guess romances are fun and I should like them. But she also was like the most Jewish character in the book, and like it would be interesting, you know, maybe in a more literary story to explore that her mother is really flighty and she doesn't have a lot of, you know, connections to people, except that she does have this Jewish family she sees like once a year for high holidays or something, and I have to wonder why those people didn't want to be more involved in her life, or I don't know. And then there's Blythe's issues with her soon-to-be ex-husband, which I feel like Brenner overcomplicated with yet another possible romance with yet another, you know, possible suitor. I'm like, you know, just stop already and actually have your characters, you know, build up your characters and have them interact rather than constantly, you know, throwing random shit at them. Yeah, I don't know. And so, yeah, and I'm leaving out some other, you know, plot, you know, twisters, which I don't know. There's one with Marin, which maybe I sort of appreciate because, you know, it forces her to realize she's more similar to her mother, who she resents for a lot of this novel, for, you know, hiding her true biology paternity from her. And it forces her to see that things aren't so easy. So I like that sort of, you know, loop in the story, and I certainly wish there was a lot more when it came to Amelia and Nadine, and talking about you know, the realities of what parents owe their children in terms of sort of family security versus, you know, following your own heart. But Nadine obviously was always meant to be the bad guy, and it's hard for me too, maybe, because Amelia and Kelly were also the queer representation. So if we want to see Nadine, who hates them, as the bad guy, maybe that's deserved. Or maybe not, you know, obviously. In a literary story, this would all be more complex. But yeah, that's what this story is about. I do feel like if you like feel-good moments, I guess you'd like this, but again, you know, it's more like it's all telegraphed rather than explored in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously there are, you know, scenes in real time and all of that, but, you know, in terms of exploring interiority, there's just not much space to do that other than Brenner, you know, just, you know, bluntly telling you what everyone is feeling. But you know, then again, on the other side, it's a lot less exhausting to read something that's this plot forward, and it's a fun, breezy, ultimately pretty hopeful story. And from here, alas, I'm going into a bunch of fiction that I haven't started yet, so I'm hoping, you know, that I can squeeze it in. The first one I at least want to finish this month, even if we only have a couple days left. This is an Egyptian novel by Orly Castel-Bloom, translated by Todd Hasak-Lowy from Hebrew. And this is my Women in Translation Month pick. Now that we're at the very end of August, I have a Women in Translation book that I want to read and review before the month is out. We shall see how this goes. Maybe I will be reporting back very, very soon, I hope. And the next two books are some chunky fantasy books, which is the genre I think I go to much more gleefully than the other two when I want a sense of fun and excitement and dealing with the sort of plot accoutrements of fantastical stuff that I love. So anyway, here's the first one I have on Audible. This is The Library of Broken Worlds by Dawn Alaya Johnson. This is YA. It takes place in a library. It's a secondary world. I think it is critiqued for being overly complicated, but I tend to like lots of world building, so I wanted to see how I would do with that. And the second book might be my most anticipated read of the year, release of 2023, I should say. This is A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. It is her chunkster prequel to her chunkster book, The Priory of the Orange Tree, which was this elaborate George and the Dragon retelling, and then this book, you know, gives even more elaborate world building for the world she created with multiple continents and cultures. I loved this. I feel like there is a little bit of a fair bit of criticism, it feels like, about this book. Maybe it's just too long and convoluted for some people, but I fell hook, line, and sinker for the first book. So this one probably has a lot to live up to. So either it's going to crash and burn, or maybe I may make more excuses for it and apologies for it as I read it, but I'm hoping it'll actually live up and mostly be a really, really fun read. I might be reading the bulk of it during a holiday weekend coming up in the US next weekend. That feels like perhaps a good excuse to stay in bed and get through this really, really chunky book. And that's all I have for you now. Speaking of weekends and weeks, I actually did just come off of a long weekend, and now I gotta get back into the work week, so I really am hoping that this reading lives up and brightens up my day. And I hope the rest of you are enjoying your end of month reading. If you've read or have thoughts about any of these books, I'd love to hear them. I will be back on this channel with my month's book haul, so stay tuned for that coming up in the very near future. And yeah, in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.